Lily, the caretaker's daughter, was literally run off her feet. Hardly had she brought one gentleman into the little pantry behind the office on the ground floor and helped him off with his overcoat than the wheezy hall doorbell clanged again, and she had to scamper along the bare hallway to let in another guest. It was well for her she had not to attend to the ladies also, but Miss Kate and Miss Julia had thought of that and had converted the bathroom upstairs into a ladies' dressing room. Miss Kate and Miss Julia were there, gossiping and laughing and fussing, walking after each other to the head of the stairs, peering down over the banisters and calling down to Lily to ask her who had come.
It was always a great affair, the Mrs. Morkan's annual dance. Everybody who knew them came to it. Friends of the family, old friends of the family, the members of Julia's choir, any of Kate's pupils that were grown up enough, and even some of Mary Jane's pupils too. Never once had it fallen flat. For years and years it had gone off in splendid style, as long as anyone could remember. Ever since Kate and Julia, after the death of their brother Pat, had left the house in Stony Batter and moved to live with them and taken their only niece to live with them in the dark, gaunt house on Usher's Island, the upper part of which they had rented from Mr. Fulham, the corn factor on the ground floor. That was a good 30 years ago, if it was a day. Mary Jane, who was then a little girl in short clothes, was now the main prop of the household, for she had the organ in Haddington Road. She had been through the academy and gave a pupils' concert every year in the upper room of the ancient concert rooms. Many of her pupils belonged to the better class families on the Kingstown and Dalkey line. Old as they were, her aunts also did their share. Julia, though she was quite grey, was still the leading soprano in Adam and Eve's. And Kate, being too feeble to go out about much, gave music lessons to beginners on the old square piano in the back room. Lily, the caretaker's daughter, did housemaid's work for them.
Though their life was modest, they believed in eating well. The best of everything, diamond bone sirloins, 3-shilling tea and the best bottled stout. Lily seldom made a mistake in the orders, so she got on well with her 3 mistresses. They were fussy, that was all, and the only thing they would not stand was back answers. Of course, they had good reason to be fussy on such a night. It was long after 10 o'clock, and yet there was no sign of Gabriel and his wife Greta, and they were dreadfully afraid that Freddie Malins might turn up screwed. They would not wish for worlds that any of Mary Jane's pupils should see him under the influence. When he was like that, it was sometimes very hard to manage him. Freddie Malins always came late, but they wondered what could be keeping Gabriel, and that was what brought them every 2 minutes to the banisters to ask Lily, had Gabriel or Freddie come?
Oh, Mr. Conroy, Miss Kate and Miss Julia thought you were never coming. Good night, Mrs. Conroy.
I'll engage they did, but they forget that my wife here takes 3 mortal hours to dress herself.
Miss Kate, here's Mrs. Conroy.
Kate and Julia came toddling down the dark stairs at once. Both of them kissed Gabriel's wife, said she must be perished alive, and asked, was Gabriel with her?
Here I am, right as the mail, Aunt Kate. Go on up, I'll follow.
Gabriel continued scraping his feet vigorously, while the 3 women went upstairs laughing to the ladies' dressing room. A light fringe of snow lay like a cape on the shoulders of his overcoat, and like toe caps on the toes of his galoshes. And as the buttons of his overcoat slipped with a squeaking noise through the snow-stiffened frieze, a cold, fragrant air from out of doors escaped from crevices and folds.
Is it snowing again, Mr. Conroy?
Yes, Lily, and I think we're in for a night of it.
Gabriel looked up at the pantry ceiling, which was shaking with the stamping and shuffling of feet on the floor above. He listened for a moment to the piano and then glanced at the girl, who was folding his overcoat carefully at the end of a shelf.
Tell me, Lily, do you still go to school?
Oh, no, sir. I'm done schooling this year and more.
Oh, then I suppose we'll be going to one of your weddings one of these fine days with your young man, eh?
The men that are now are only all palaver and what they can get out of you.
Gabriel coloured as if he felt he made a mistake, and without looking at her, kicked off his goloshes and flicked actively with his muffler at his patent leather shoes. When he had flicked a lustre into his shoes, he stood up and pulled his waistcoat down more tightly on his plump body. Then he took a coin rapidly from his pocket and thrust it into Lily's hand.
Oh, Lily, it's Christmas time, isn't it? Just here's a little...
Oh, no, sir. Really, sir, I wouldn't take it.
Christmas time, Christmas time.
Gabriel almost trotted to the stairs to get away from Lily and distastefully waved his hand to her. Lily, seeing that he had already gained the stairs and her protests were in vain, called out after him.
Well, thank you, sir.
At the top of the stairs, Gabriel waited outside the drawing room door until the waltz should finish, listening to the skirts that swept against it and to the shuffling of feet. He was still discomposed by the girl's bitter and sudden retort. It had cast a gloom over him, which he tried to dispel by arranging his cuffs and the bows of his tie. He then took from his waistcoat pocket a little paper and glanced at the headings he had made for his speech. He was undecided about the lines from Robert Browning, for he feared they would be above the heads of his hearers. Some quotation that they would recognise from Shakespeare or from the melodies would be better. The indelicate clacking of the men's heels and the shuffling of their soles reminded him that their grade of culture differed from his. He would only make himself ridiculous by quoting poetry to them which they could not understand. They would think that he was airing his superior education. He would fail with them just as he had failed with the girl in the pantry. He had taken up a wrong tone. His whole speech was a mistake from first to last, an utter failure.
Just then, his aunts and his wife came out of the ladies' dressing room. His aunts were two small, plainly dressed old women. Aunt Julia was an inch or so the taller. Her hair, drawn low over the tops of her ears, was grey. And grey also, with darker shadows, was her large, flaccid face. Though she was stout in build and stood erect, her slow eyes and parted lips gave her the appearance of a woman who did not know where she was or where she was going. Aunt Kate was more vivacious. Her face, healthier than her sister's, was all puckers and creases like a shrivelled red apple. Her hair was braided in the same old-fashioned way, had not lost its nut-ripe colour. They both kissed Gabriel frankly. He was their favourite nephew, the son of their dead sister Ellen, who had married T.J. Conroy of the Port and Docks.
Greta tells me you're not going to take a cab back to Monkstown tonight, Gabriel.
No, Aunt Kate, we've had quite enough of that last year, hadn't we, Greta? Don't you remember? Cab windows rattling all the way and the east wind blowing in after we passed Marion. Greta caught a dreadful cold.
Quite right, Gabriel, quite right. You can't be too careful.
But as for Greta there, she'd walk home in the snow if she were let.
Oh, don't mind him. He's really an awful bother, what with green shades for Tom's eyes at night and making him do the dumbbells and forcing Eva to eat the stirabout. Poor child, she simply hates the sight of it. But you'll never guess what he makes me wear now. Galoshes. That's the latest. Whenever it's wet underfoot, I must put on my galoshes. Tonight even he wanted me to put them on, but I wouldn't. The next thing will be he'll buy me a diving suit.
Gabriel laughed nervously and patted his tie reassuringly, while Aunt Kate nearly doubled herself, so heartily did she enjoy the joke. The smile soon faded from Aunt Julia's face, and her mirthless eyes were directed towards her nephew's face. After a pause, she asked,
And what are galoshes, Gabriel?
Galoshes, Julia. Goodness me, don't you know what galoshes are? You wear them over your boots, isn't it, Greta?
Yes, gutta percha things. Oh, we both have a pair now. Gabriel says everyone wears them on the continent.
Oh, on the continent.
It's nothing very wonderful, but Greta thinks it's very funny.
But tell me, Gabriel, you've seen about the room. Greta was just saying.
Oh, the room is all right. I've taken one in the Gresham.
To be sure, by far the best thing to do. And the children, Greta, you're not anxious about them?
Oh, for one night. Besides, Bessie will look after them.
To be sure. What a comfort it is to have a girl like that, one you can depend on. There's that Lily. I'm sure I don't know what's come over her lately. She's not the girl she was at all.
Gabriel was about to ask his aunt some questions on this point, but she broke off suddenly to gaze after her sister, who had wandered down the stairs and was craning her neck over the banisters.
Now I ask you, where is Julia going? Where is Julia going?
Here's Freddie.
At the same moment, a clapping of hands and a final flourish of the pianist told that the waltz had ended. The drawing room door was opened from within and some couples came out. Aunt Kate drew Gabriel aside hurriedly and whispered into his ear.
Slip down there, Gabriel, like a good fellow, and see if he's all right. And don't let him up if he's screwed. I'm sure he's screwed.
Gabriel went to the stairs and listened over the banisters. He could hear two persons talking in the pantry, and then he recognised Freddie Mallins's laugh. He went down the stairs noisily.
Such a relief, Greta, that Gabriel is here. I always find it easier in my mind when he's here. Julia, Miss Daly and Miss Power will take some refreshment. Thank you for your beautiful waltz, Miss Daly. It made lovely time.
And may we have some refreshment too, Miss Morgan?
Julia, and here's Mr. Brown and Miss Furlong. Take them in, Julia, with Mr. Daly and Miss Power.
I am a man for the ladies. You know, Miss Morgan, the reason they are so fond of me is...
He did not finish his sentence, but seeing that Aunt Kate was out of earshot, at once led three young ladies into the back room. The middle of the room was occupied by two square tables placed end to end, and on these Aunt Julia and the caretaker were straightening and smoothing a large cloth. On the sideboard were arrayed dishes and plates and glasses and bundles of knives and forks and spoons. The top of the closed square piano served also as a sideboard for viands and sweets. At a smaller sideboard in one corner, two young men were standing drinking hot bitters. Mr. Brown led his charges thither and invited them all, in jest, to some ladies' punch, hot, strong and sweet. As they said they never took anything strong, he opened 3 bottles of lemonade for them. Then he asked one of the young men to move aside and, taking hold of the decanter, filled out for himself a goodly measure of whisky. The young men eyed him respectfully while he took a trial sip.
God help me, it's the doctor's orders.
His wizened face broke into a broader smile, and the 3 young ladies laughed in musical echo to his pleasantry, swaying their bodies to and fro with nervous jerks of their shoulders. The boldest said, "Oh, now, Mr. Brown, I'm sure the doctor never ordered anything of the kind." Mr. Brown took another sip of his whisky and said, with sidling mimicry,
Well, you see, I'm like the famous Mrs. Cassidy, who was reported to have said, "Now, Mary Grimes, if I don't take it, make me take it, for I feel I want it."
His hot face had leaned forward a little too confidentially, and he had assumed a very low Dublin accent, so that the young ladies, with one instinct, received his speech in silence. Miss Furlong, who was one of Mary Jane's pupils, asked Miss Daly what was the name of that pretty waltz she had played, and Mr. Brown, seeing that he was ignored, turned promptly to the two young men who were more appreciative. A red-faced young woman dressed in pansy came into the room, excitedly clapping her hands and crying, "Quadrilles! Quadrilles!" Close on her heels came Aunt Kate, crying,
"2 gentlemen and 3 ladies, Mary Jane."
Oh, here's Mr. Bergen and Mr. Kerrigan. Mr. Kerrigan, will you take Miss Powers? May I get you a partner, Mr. Bergen? Oh, how about, Mr. Bergen? Yes, that'll just do nicely.
3 ladies, Mary Jane.
The 2 young gentlemen asked the ladies if they might have the pleasure, and Mary Jane turned to Miss Daly.
Oh, Miss Daly, you're really awfully good after playing the last 2 dances, but we're really short of ladies tonight.
Miss Daly said she didn't mind in the least. "But I have a nice partner for you," she told Mary Jane. "Mr. Bartell Darcy, the tenor. I'll get him to sing later on. All Dublin is raving about him."
Oh, Mr. Darcy, yes, he has a lovely voice, a lovely voice.
As the piano had twice begun the prelude to the first figure, Mary Jane led her recruits quickly from the room. They had hardly gone when Aunt Julia wandered slowly into the room, looking behind her at something.
What is the matter, Julia? What is it?
Julia, who was carrying in a column of table napkins, turned to her sister and said simply, as if the question had surprised her,
"It's only Freddie, Kate, and Gabriel with him."
In fact, right behind her, Gabriel could be seen piloting Freddie Malins across the landing. The latter, a young man of about 40, was of Gabriel's size and build, with very round shoulders. His face was fleshy and pallid, touched with colour only at the thick hanging lobes of his ears and at the wide wings of his nose. He had coarse features, a blunt nose, a convex and receding brow, tumid and protruded lips. His heavy-lidded eyes and the disorder of his scanty hair made him look sleepy. He was laughing heartily, in a high key, at a story which he had been telling Gabriel on the stairs, and at the same time rubbing the knuckles of his left fist backwards and forwards into his left eye.
"Good evening, Freddie."
Freddie bade the Misses Morkan good evening in what seemed an offhand fashion, by reason of the habitual catch in his voice, and then seeing that Mr. Brown was grinning at him from the sideboard, crossed the room on rather shaky legs and began to repeat in an undertone the story he had just told to Gabriel.
He's not so bad, is he, Gabriel?
No, hardly noticeable.
Oh, no. Isn't he the terrible fellow? And his poor mother made him take the pledge on New Year's Eve. But come on, Gabriel, into the drawing room.
Before leaving the room with Gabriel, Aunt Kate signalled to Mr. Brown to take charge of Freddie by frowning and shaking her forefinger in warning to and fro. Mr. Brown nodded in answer, and when she had gone, said to Freddie Malins,
"Now then, Teddy, I'm going to fill you out a good glass of lemonade, just to buck you up."
Freddie, who was nearing the climax of his story, waved the offer aside impatiently. But Mr. Brown, having first called Freddie's attention to a disarray in his dress, filled out and handed him a full glass of lemonade. Teddy's left hand accepted the glass mechanically, his right hand being engaged in the mechanical readjustment of his dress. Mr. Brown, whose face was once more wrinkling with mirth, poured out for himself a glass of whiskey, while Freddie exploded in a kink of high-pitched bronchitic laughter before he had even reached the climax of his story. and setting down his untasted and overflowing glass of lemonade, began to rub the knuckles of his left fist backwards and forwards into his left eye, all the time repeating words of his last phrase as well as his fit of laughter would allow him.
Mary Jane began playing her Academy piece, full of runs and difficult passages to the hushed drawing room. Gabriel could not listen. He liked music, but the piece she was playing had no melody for him. He doubted whether it had any melody for the other listeners, though they had begged Mary Jane to play something. 4 young men, who had come from the refreshment room to stand in the doorway at the sound of the piano, had gone away quietly in couples after a few minutes. The only persons who seemed to follow the music were Mary Jane herself, her hands racing along the keyboard, or lifted from it at the pauses, like those of a priestess in momentary imprecation, and Aunt Kate, who was standing at her elbow to turn the page. Gabriel's eyes, irritated by the floor, which glittered with beeswax under the heavy chandelier, wandered over to the wall above the piano.
A picture of the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet hung there, and beside it was a picture of the 2 murdered princes in the tower, which Aunt Julia had worked in red, blue and brown wools when she was a girl. Probably in the school they had gone to as girls, that kind of work had been taught for 1 year. His mother had worked for him as a birthday present a waistcoat of purple tabinet with little foxes' heads upon it, lined with brown satin and having round mulberry buttons. It was strange that his mother had no musical talent, though Aunt Kate used to call her the brains carrier of the Morkan family. Both she and Julia had always seemed a little proud of their serious and matronly sister. Her photograph stood before the pier glass. She held an open book on her knees and was pointing out something in it to Constantine, who, dressed in a man-of-war suit, lay at her feet. A shadow passed over Gabriel's face as he remembered her sullen opposition to his marriage. Some slighting phrases she had used still rankled in his memory. She had once spoken of Greta as being country cute, and that was not true of Greta at all. It was Greta who had nursed her during all her last long illness in their house at Monkstown.
Gabriel knew that Mary Jane must be near the end of her piece, for she was playing again the opening melody with runs of scales after every bar. While he waited, the resentment in his heart died down. The piece ended with a thrill of octaves in the treble and a final deep octave in the bass. Great applause greeted Mary Jane as, blushing and rolling up her music nervously, she escaped the room. The most vigorous clapping came from the 4 young men in the doorway who had gone away to the refreshment room at the beginning and had come back once the piano had stopped. Lancers were arranged, and Gabriel found himself partnered with Molly Ivers. Molly was a frank, mannered, talkative young lady with a freckled face and prominent brown eyes. She wore a brooch on her dress that had an Irish emblem and motto. When they had taken their places, Molly took her chance to challenge Gabriel.
I have a crow to pluck with you.
With me? What is it?
Who's GC? Oh, innocent Amy. I found out that you write for the Daily Express. Now, aren't you ashamed of yourself?
Why should I be ashamed of myself?
Well, I'm ashamed of you. To say that you'd write for a paper like that. I didn't think you were a West Briton.
A look of perplexity appeared on Gabriel's face. It was true that he wrote a literary column every Wednesday in the Daily Express, for which he was paid 15 shillings. But that did not make him a West Briton, surely. The books he received for review were almost more welcome than the paltry cheque. He loved to feel the covers and turn over the pages of newly printed books. Nearly every day, when his teaching in the college was ended, he would wander down the quays to the second-hand booksellers, to Hickey's on Bachelor's Walk, or Webb's or Massey's on Aston's Quay, or to O'Clohissey's in the By Street. Gabriel did not know how to meet her charge. He wanted to say that literature was above politics, but they were friends of many years' standing, and their careers had been parallel, first at the university and then as teachers. He could not risk a grandiose phrase with her. When their turn to cross had come, he was still perplexed and inattentive. Molly promptly took his hand in a warm grasp and said in a soft, friendlier tone,
Of course, I was only joking. A friend of mine showed me your review of Browning's poem. That's how I found out your little secret. I must say I liked the review very much. Mr. Conroy, will you come for an excursion to the Aran Isles this summer? We're going to stay there a whole month. It'll be splendid out in the Atlantic. You ought to come. Mr. Clancy is coming, and Mr. Kilkelly, and Kathleen Carney. It would be splendid for Greta if she'd come too. She's from Connaught, isn't she?
Her people are.
But you will come, won't you?
Well, the fact is, I have just arranged to go.
Go where?
Well, you know, every year I go for a cycling tour with some of the fellows, and so.
But where?
Well, we usually go to France, or Belgium, or perhaps Germany.
And why do you go to France or Belgium instead of visiting your own land?
Well, it's partly to keep in touch with the languages, and partly for a change.
And haven't you your own language to keep in touch with? Irish.
Well, if it comes to that, you know, Irish is not my language.
Their neighbours had turned to listen to the cross-examination. Gabriel glanced right and left nervously and tried to keep his good humour under the ordeal, which was making a blush invade his forehead.
And haven't you your own land to visit? The land that you know nothing of? Your own people and your own country?
Oh, to tell you the truth, I'm sick of my own country. Sick of it.
Why? Of course, you have no answer.
Gabriel tried to cover his agitation by taking part in the dance with great energy. He avoided her eyes, for he had seen a sour expression on her face. But when they met in the long chain, he was surprised to feel his hand firmly pressed. She looked at him from under her brows for a moment, quizzically, until he smiled. Then, just as the chain was about to start again, she stood on tiptoe and whispered into his ear.
West Britain.
When the lancers were over, Gabriel went away to a remote corner of the room where Freddie's mother was sitting. Mrs. Mallins was a stout, feeble old woman with white hair. Her voice had a catch in it, like her son's, and she stuttered slightly. She had been told that Freddie had come and that he was nearly all right. She lived with her married daughter in Glasgow and came to Dublin on a visit once a year. Gabriel asked her whether she had had a good crossing. She answered placidly that she had had a beautiful crossing and that the captain had been most attentive to her. She spoke also of the beautiful house her daughter kept in Glasgow and all the friends they had there. While her tongue rambled on, Gabriel tried to banish from his mind all memory of the unpleasant incident with Miss Ivors. Of course, the girl, or woman, or whatever she was an enthusiast. But there was a time for all things. But perhaps he ought not to have answered her like that. Still, she had no right to call him a West Briton before people, even in jest. She had tried to make him look ridiculous, heckling him and staring at him with her rabbit's eyes. He saw his wife making her way towards him through the waltzing couples. When she reached him, she said into his ear,
Oh, Gabriel, Aunt Kate wants to know, won't you carve the goose as usual? Miss Daly will carve the ham and I'll do the pudding.
All right.
She's sending in the younger ones first, as soon as this waltz is over, so we'll have the table to ourselves.
Were you dancing?
Of course I was. Didn't you see me? What row had you with Molly Ivers?
No row? Why? Did she say so?
Something like that. I'm trying to get that Mr. Darcy to sing. He's full of conceit, I think.
There was no row. Only she wanted me to go for a trip to the west of Ireland and I said I wouldn't.
Oh, do go, Gabriel. I'd love to see Galway again.
Oh, you can go if you like.
Oh, well, there's a nice husband for you, Mrs. Mallins.
As Greta made her way back across the room, Mrs. Mallins, who hadn't paused her story, continued to tell Gabriel what beautiful places there were in Scotland and beautiful scenery. Her son-in-law brought them every year to the lakes and they would go fishing. Her son-in-law was a splendid fisher. One day he caught a beautiful big fish and the man in the hotel cooked it for their dinner. Gabriel hardly heard what she said. Now that supper was coming near, he began to think again about his speech and about the quotation. When he saw Freddie coming across the room to visit his mother, Gabriel left the chair free for him and retired into the embrasure of the window.
The drawing room was starting to clear, and from the back room came the clatter of plates and knives. Those who still remained in the drawing room seemed tired of dancing and were conversing quietly in little groups. Gabriel's trembling fingers tapped the cold pane of the window. How cool it must be outside. How pleasant it would be to walk out alone, first along the river and then through the park. The snow would be lying on the branches of the trees and forming a bright cap on the top of the Wellington Monument. How much more pleasant it would be out there than at the supper table.
He ran over the headings of his speech: Irish hospitality, sad memories, the three graces, the quotation from Browning. He repeated to himself a phrase he had written in his review. One feels that one is listening to a thought-tormented music. Miss Ivers had praised the review. Was she sincere? Had she really any life of her own behind all of her propagandism? There had never been any ill feeling between them until that night. It unnerved him to think that she would be at the supper table, looking up at him while he spoke with her critical, quizzing eyes. Perhaps she would not be sorry to see him fail in his speech. An idea came into his mind and gave him courage. He would say, alluding to Aunt Kate and Aunt Julia, "Ladies and gentlemen, the generation which is now on the wane among us may have had its faults, but for my part, I think it had certain qualities of hospitality, of humour, of humanity, which the new and very serious and hyper-educated generation that is growing up around us seems to me to lack." Very good. Yes, that was one for Molly Ivers. What did he care that his aunts were only two ignorant old women?
A murmur in the room attracted Gabriel's attention. Mr. Brown was advancing from the door, gallantly escorting Aunt Julia, who leaned upon his arm, smiling and hanging her head. An irregular musketry of applause escorted her also as far as the piano, and then, as Mary Jane seated herself on the stool, and Aunt Julia, no longer smiling, half turned so as to pitch her voice fairly into the room, gradually ceased. Gabriel recognised the prelude. It was that of an old song of Aunt Julia's, arrayed for the bridal. Her voice, strong and clear in tone, attacked with great spirit the runs which embellished the air, and though she sang very rapidly, she did not miss even the smallest of the grace notes. To follow the voice without looking at the singer's face was to feel and share the excitement of swift and secure flight. Gabriel applauded loudly with all the others at the close of the song, and loud applause was borne in from the invisible supper table. It sounded so genuine that a little colour struggled into Aunt Julia's face as she bent to replace in the music stand the old leather-bound songbook that had her initials on the cover.
Freddie, who had listened with his head perched sideways, was still applauding when everyone else had ceased. He spoke animatedly to his mother, who nodded in agreement. At last, when he could clap no more, Freddie stood up, hurried across the room to Aunt Julia. He seized her hand with both of his vigorously when words failed him or the catch in his voice proved too much for him. Finally, he said,
I was just telling my mother, I never heard you sing so well. Never. No, I never heard your voice as good as it is tonight now. Would you believe that now? And that's the truth. Upon my word and honour, that's the truth. I never heard your voice sound so fresh and so clear. Never.
Aunt Julia smiled broadly and murmured something about compliments as she released her hand from his grasp. Mr. Brown extended his open hand towards her and said,
Miss Julia Morgan, my latest discovery.
Well, Brown, if you're serious, you might make a worse discovery. All I can say is I never heard her sing half as well as long as I'm coming here, and that's the honest truth.
Neither did I. I think her voice has greatly improved.
Oh, 30 years ago, I hadn't a bad voice, as voices go.
I often told Julia that she was simply thrown away in that choir. But of course, she never listened to me. No, she wouldn't be told by me or anyone. She slaved there in that choir night and day, 6 o'clock on Christmas morning, and all for what?
well, isn't it for the honour of God, Aunt Kate?
I know all about the honour of God, Mary Jane, but I think it's not at all honourable for the Pope to turn out women of the choir that have slaved there all their lives and put little whippersnappers of boys in their places. I suppose it is for the good of the church if the Pope does it, but it's not just, Mary Jane, and it's not right.
Now, Aunt Kate, you're giving scandal to Mr. Brown, who is of the other persuasion.
Oh, I don't question the Pope's being right. I'm only a stupid old woman and I wouldn't presume to do such a thing. But there is such a thing as common everyday politeness and gratitude. And if I were in Julia's place, I'd tell that Father Healy straight to his face.
And besides, Aunt Kate, we are all very hungry, and when we are all very hungry, we're very, very quarrelsome.
And when we are thirsty, we are very quarrelsome too.
Yes, so perhaps we should go to supper and finish this discussion afterwards.
On the landing outside the drawing room, Gabriel found his wife and Mary Jane trying to persuade Miss Ivors to stay for supper. But Miss Ivors, who had put on her hat and was buttoning her cloak, would not stay.
Oh, but only for 10 minutes, Molly. That won't delay you.
Take a pick itself. After all your dancing.
I really couldn't. I'm not in the least bit hungry and I have to go. I've overstayed my time already.
Oh, I'm afraid you didn't really enjoy yourself at all.
Oh, I enjoyed myself ever so much, I assure you. But you really must let me run off now.
Oh, but how can you get home?
It's only 2 steps up the quay.
Well, if you will allow me, Miss Ivors, I'll see you home if you really are obliged.
I won't hear of it. For goodness sake, go in and have your suppers and don't mind me. I'm quite well able to take care of myself.
Well, you're the comical girl, Molly.
Bannock live.
Mary Jane gazed after Molly as she ran down the staircase, a moody, puzzled expression on her face, while Greta leaned over the banister to listen for the hall door. Gabriel asked himself, was he the cause of her abrupt departure? But she did not seem to be in ill humour. She had gone away laughing. He stared blankly down the staircase. At that moment, Aunt Kate came toddling out of the supper room, almost wringing her hands in despair.
Where is Gabriel? Where on earth is Gabriel? There's everyone waiting in there. Stage to let and nobody to carve the goose.
Here I am, Aunt Kate, ready to carve a flock of geese if necessary.
A fat brown goose lay at one end of the table. At the other end, on a bed of creased paper strewn with sprigs of parsley, lay a great ham. The ham was stripped of its outer skin and peppered over with crust crumbs. A neat paper frill sat round its shin, and beside this was a round of spiced beef. Between these rival ends ran parallel lines of side dishes, 2 little minsters of jelly, red and yellow, a shallow dish full of blocks of blancmange and red jam, dishes of custard topped with grated nutmeg, small bowls full of chocolates and sweets wrapped in gold and silver papers, a large green leaf-shaped dish with a stalk-shaped handle held purple raisins and peeled almonds, while its companion held a solid rectangle of Smyrna figs, and in the middle of it all stood a glass vase with some tall stalks of celery.
In the centre of the table there stood, as sentries to a fruit stand which held a pyramid of oranges and American apples, 2 squat, old-fashioned decanters of cut glass, one containing port and the other dark sherry. On the closed square piano, a pudding in a huge yellow dish lay in waiting, and behind it were 3 squads of bottles of stout and ale and minerals, drawn up according to the colours of their uniforms. The first 2 black with brown and red labels, the third and smallest squad white with transverse green sashes. Gabriel took his seat boldly at the head of the table, and having looked to the edge of the carver, plunged his fork firmly into the goose. He felt quite at ease now, for he was an expert carver, and liked nothing better than to find himself at the head of a well-laden table.
While Gabriel and Miss Daly exchanged plates of goose and plates of ham and spiced beef, Lily went from guest to guest with a dish of hot floury potatoes wrapped in a white napkin. This was Mary Jane's idea. She had also suggested apple sauce for the goose, but Aunt Kate had said that plain roast goose without any apple sauce had always been good enough for her, and she hoped she might never eat worse. Mary Jane waited on her pupils and saw that they got the best slices, and Aunt Kate and Aunt Julia opened and carried across from the piano bottles of stout and ale for the gentlemen and bottles of minerals for the ladies.
There was a great deal of confusion and laughter and noise, the noise of orders and counter-orders, of knives and forks, of corks and glass stoppers. Gabriel began to serve second helpings before he had finished the first. Everyone protested loudly, and he compromised by taking a long drink of stout, for he had found the carving hot work. Mary Jane settled down quietly to her supper, and Aunt Kate and Aunt Julia were still toddling around the table, walking in each other's heels, getting in each other's way. Mr. Brown begged of them to sit down and eat their supper, and so did Gabriel. But they said there was time enough. At last, Freddie Malins stood up, capturing Aunt Kate, plumped her down in her chair amid general laughter. When everyone had been well served, Gabriel said, smiling,
Now, if anyone wants a little more of what the vulgar people call stuffing, let him or her speak. Very well. Then kindly forget my existence, ladies and gentlemen, for a few minutes.
He set to his supper and took no part in the conversation. The subject of talk was the opera company, which was then at the Theatre Royal. Mr. Bartell Darcy, the tenor, praised very highly the leading contralto of the company. But Miss Furlong thought she had a rather vulgar style of production. One of Mary Jane's pupils had given her a pass for Mignon. Of course it was very fine, she said, but it made her think of poor Georgina Burns. Mr. Brown could go back further still, to the old Italian companies that used to come to Dublin. T-Gens, Ilma de Murzka, Campanini, the Great Trebelli, Ravelli, Aramburo.
Those were the days when there was something like singing to be heard in Dublin. I can remember when the top gallery of the Old Royal used to be packed night after night. On one occasion, an Italian tenor had sung 5 encores to Let Me Like a Soldier Fall, introducing a high C every time. Some nights the gallery boys would unyoke the carriages from the horse, or the horses from the carriage of some great prima donna and pull her themselves through the streets to her hotel. Tell me, Mr. Darcy, why do they never play the grand old operas now? Denora, Lucrezia Borgia. I'll tell you why. It's because they cannot get the voices to sing them. That is why.
Oh, Mr. Brown, I presume there are as good singers today as there were then.
Well, then, where are they?
Well, in London, Paris, Milan. I suppose Caruso, for example, is quite as good, if not better, than any of those men you have mentioned.
Maybe so, but I may tell you, I doubt it strongly.
There was only one tenor that could ever please me, but I suppose none of you have ever heard of him.
But who was he, Miss Morgan?
His name was Parkinson. I heard him when he was in his prime, and I think he had then the purest tenor voice that was ever put in a man's throat.
Strange. I never even heard of him.
Yes, Miss Morgan is right. I do remember hearing of old Parkinson, but he's too far back for me.
He was a beautiful, pure, sweet, mellow English tenor.
As Aunt Kate thought back to the old days, the huge pudding was brought to the table. The clatter of forks and spoons began again as Greta served out spoonfuls and passed plates down the table. Midway down, they were held up by Mary Jane, who replenished them with raspberry or orange jelly, or with blancmange and jam. The pudding was of Aunt Julia's making, and she received praises for it from all quarters, although she said herself that it was not quite brown enough. All the gentlemen, except Gabriel, ate some of the pudding out of compliment to Aunt Julia. As Gabriel never ate sweets, the celery had been left for him. Freddie Malins also took a stalk of celery and ate it with his pudding. He had been told that celery was a capital thing for the blood, and he was just then under doctor's care. Mrs. Malins, who had been silent all through the supper, said that her son was going down to Mount Melleray in a week or so. The table then spoke of Mount Melleray, how bracing the air was down there, how hospitable the monks were, and how they never asked for a penny piece from their guests.
And do you mean to say that a chap can go down there and put up as if it were a hotel and live on the fat of the land and then walk away without paying anything?
Oh, Mr. Brown, most people give some sort of donation to the monastery when they leave.
I wish we had an institution like that in our church.
The monks never speak. They get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and they sleep in their coffins.
That's astonishing. Why did they do that?
That's the rule of the order.
Yes, but why?
I told you, that's the rule of the order.
But wouldn't a comfortable spring bed do them as well as a coffin?
They are trying to make up for the sins committed by all the sinners in the outside world. The coffin is to remind them of their last end.
Raisins and almonds and figs and apples and oranges and chocolates and sweets were now passed about the table. Aunt Julia invited all the guests to have either port or sherry. At first, Mr. Bartell Darcy refused to take either, but one of his neighbours nudged him and whispered something to him, upon which he allowed his glass to be filled. Gradually, as the last glasses were being filled, the conversation ceased. A pause followed, broken only by the noise of the wine and by unsettling of chairs. The Mrs. Morkan, all three, looked down at the tablecloth. Someone coughed once or twice, and then a few gentlemen patted the table gently as a sign for silence. The silence came, and Gabriel pushed back his chair. The patting at once grew louder in encouragement, and then ceased altogether. Gabriel leaned his 10 trembling fingers on the tablecloth and smiled nervously at the company.
Meeting a row of upturned faces, Gabriel raised his eyes to the chandelier. He imagined the piano was playing a waltz tune, and he could hear the skirts sweeping against the drawing room floor. People perhaps were standing in the snow on the quay outside, gazing up at the lighted windows and listening to the waltz music. The air was pure there. In the distance lay the park, where the trees were weighted with snow. The Wellington Monument wore a gleaming cap of snow that flashed westward over the white field of 15 acres. He began.
Ladies and gentlemen, it has fallen to my lot this evening, as in years past, to perform a very pleasing task, but a task for which I'm afraid my poor powers as a speaker are all too inadequate.
No.
But however that may be, I can only ask you tonight to take the will for the deed and to lend me your attention for a few moments while I endeavour to express to you in words what my feelings are on this occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not the first time that we have gathered under this hospitable roof, around this hospitable board. It is not the first time that we have been the recipients, or perhaps, should I say, the victims, of the hospitality of certain good ladies. I feel more strongly with every recurring year that our country has no tradition which does it so much honour and which it should guard so jealously as that of its hospitality. It is a tradition that is unique as far as my experience goes, and I have visited many places abroad among the modern nations. Some would say, perhaps, that with us it is rather a failing than anything to be boasted of. But if it is a failing in my mind, it is a princely failing, and one that I trust will be long cultivated among us. Of one thing at least I am sure. As long as this roof shelters these good ladies, the tradition of genuine, warm-hearted, courteous Irish hospitality, which our forefathers have handed down to us, and which we in turn must hand down to our descendants, is still alive among us.
A hearty murmur of assent ran round the table. It shot through Gabriel's mind that Miss Ivors was not there, and that she had gone away discourteously, and he said, with confidence in himself,
Ladies and gentlemen, a new generation is growing up in our midst, a generation actuated by new ideas and new principles. This new generation is serious and enthusiastic for these new ideas, and its enthusiasm, even when it is misdirected, is, I believe, in the main sincere. We are living in a sceptical and, if I may use the phrase, a thought-tormented age. And sometimes I fear that this new generation, educated or hyper-educated as it is, will lack those qualities of humanity, of hospitality, of a kindly humour which belonged to an older day.
Hear, hear.
But yet, there are always, in such gatherings as this, sadder thoughts that will recur to our minds. Thoughts of the past, of youth, of changes, of absent faces that we miss here tonight. Our path through life is strewn with such sad memories, and were we to brood upon them always, we could not find the heart to go on bravely with our work among the living. We have all of us living duties and living affections which claim and rightly claim our strenuous endeavours. Therefore, I will not linger on the past. I will not let any gloomy moralising intrude upon us here tonight. Here, we are gathered together for a brief moment from the bustle and rush of our everyday routine. We are met here as friends, in the spirit of good fellowship, as colleagues, in the true spirit of camaraderie, and as the guests of, what shall I call them? The three graces of the Dublin musical world.
What did Gabriel say? He said we were the three graces, aren't you?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will not attempt to choose between the good ladies. That task would be an invidious one, and one beyond my poor powers. For when I view them in turn, whether it be our chief hostess herself, whose too good heart has become a byword with all who know her, or her sister, who seems to be gifted with perennial youth, and whose singing must have been a surprise and a revelation to us all tonight. Or last but not least, when I consider our youngest hostess, talented, cheerful, hard-working, and the best of nieces. I confess, ladies and gentlemen, that I do not know to which of them I should award the prize.
Gabriel glanced down at his aunts, and seeing the large smile on Aunt Julia's face and the tears which had risen to Aunt Kate's eyes hastened to his close. He raised his glass of port gallantly, while every member of the company held a glass expectantly, and he said loudly,
Let us toast them all three together. Let us drink to their health, wealth, long life, happiness and prosperity, and may they long continue to hold the proud and self-won position which they hold in their profession, and the position of honour and affection which they hold in our hearts.
All the guests stood up, glass in hand, and turning towards the three seated ladies, sang in unison, with Mr. Brown as leader and Freddie Malins acting as officer with his fork on high.
For they are jolly gay fellows, for they are jolly gay fellows, for they are jolly gay fellows, which nobody can deny, unless he tells a lie, unless he tells a lie. For they are jolly gay fellows, for they are jolly gay fellows, for they are jolly gay fellows, which nobody can deny.
The piercing morning air came into the hall where the guests were gathering, preparing to leave.
Close the door, somebody. Mrs. Malins will catch the death of cold.
Oh, Mr. Brown is out there, Aunt Kate.
O'Brien is everywhere.
He's very attentive.
He's been laid on here like the gas all during the Christmas. But tell him to come in, Mary Jane, and close the door. I hope to God he didn't hear me.
Oh Lord, Teddy will have all the cabs in Dublin out.
Greta not down yet.
She's getting on her things, Gabriel.
Who's playing up there?
Nobody. They're all gone.
Oh no, Aunt Kate, Bartel Darcy and Miss O'Callaghan aren't gone yet.
Someone is fooling at the piano anyhow.
Oh, it makes me feel so cold to look at you two gentlemen all muffled up. I wouldn't like to be taking that journey home at this hour.
I'd like nothing better this minute than a rattling fine walk in the country, or a fast drive with a good horse and trap.
We used to have a very good horse and trap at home.
The never to be forgotten Johnny.
Why, what was wonderful about Johnny?
The late lamented Patrick Morkan, our grandfather that is, commonly known in his later years as the old gentleman, was a glue boiler.
Oh, now, Gabriel, he was no such thing. He had a starch mill.
Well, glue or starch. The old gentleman had a horse by the name of Johnny. And Johnny used to work in the old gentleman's mill, walking round and round in order to drive the mill. Well, that was all very well, but now comes the tragic part about Johnny. One day, the old gentleman thought he'd like to drive out with the quality to a military review in the park.
The Lord have mercy on his soul.
Amen. So, the old gentleman, as I said, harnessed Johnny and put on his very best tall hat and his very best stock collar and drove out in grand style from his ancestral mansion somewhere near Back Lane, I think.
Oh, now, Gabriel, he didn't live in Back Lane, really. Only the mill was there.
Out from the mansion of his forefathers, he drove with Johnny, and everything went on beautifully until Johnny came in sight of King Billy's statue. And whether he fell in love with the horse that King Billy sits on, or whether he thought he was back in the mill, he began to walk around the statue. Round and round he went. Oh, and the old gentleman, who was a very pompous old gentleman, was highly indignant. Go on, sir! What do you mean, sir? Johnny! Johnny! Most extraordinary conduct. Can't understand this horse.
The peal of laughter which followed Gabriel's imitation of the incident was interrupted by a resounding knock at the hall door. Mary Jane ran to open it and let in Freddie Malins. Freddie, with his hat well back on his head and his shoulders humped with cold, was puffing and steaming after his exertions and said he could only get one cab.
Oh, never mind, Freddie. We'll find another along the quay.
Oh, now, come on, we better not keep Mrs. Malins waiting.
Mrs. Malins was helped down the front steps by her son and Mr. Brown, and after many manoeuvres hoisted into the cab. Freddie clambered in after her and spent a long time settling her on the seat, with Mr. Brown helping with advice. At last she was settled comfortably, and Freddie invited Mr. Brown into the cab. There was a good deal of confused talk, and then finally Mr. Brown got in. The cabman settled his rug over his knees and bent down for the address. The confusion grew greater, and the cabman was directed differently by Freddie Malins and Mr. Brown, each of whom had his head out through a window of the cab. The difficulty was to know where to drop Mr. Brown along the route. Aunt Kate, Aunt Julia and Mary Jane helped the discussion from the doorstep, with cross directions and contradictions and abundance of laughter. As for Freddie, he was speechless with laughter. He popped his head in and out of the window every moment, to the great danger of his hat, and told his mother how the discussion was progressing. Till at last Mr. Brown shouted to the bewildered cabman above the din of everybody's laughter. "Do you know Trinity College?"
Yes, sir.
"Well, drive bang up against the gates of Trinity College and we'll tell you where to go. You understand now?
Yes, sir.
Make like a bird for Trinity College."
Right, sir.
The horse was whipped up and the cab rattled off along the quay amid a chorus of laughter and adieus.
Gabriel had not gone to the door with the others. He was in a dark part of the hall, gazing up the staircase. A woman was standing near the top of the first flight, in the shadow. He could not see her face, but he could see the terracotta and salmon pink panels of her skirt, which appeared black and white in the shadow. It was his wife. She was leaning on the banisters, listening to something. Gabriel was surprised at her stillness and strained his ear to listen. But he could hear little save the noise of laughter and dispute on the front steps, a few chords struck on the piano and a few notes of a man's voice singing. He stood still in the gloom of the hall, gazing up at his wife and trying to catch the air that the voice was singing. The hall door was closed, and Aunt Kate and Aunt Julia and Mary Jane came down the hall, still laughing.
Oh, well, isn't Freddie terrible? He's really terrible.
Gabriel said nothing, but pointed up the stairs towards where his wife was standing. Now that the hall door was closed, the voice and the piano could be heard more clearly. Gabriel held up his hand for them to be silent. The song seemed to be in the old Irish tonality, and the singer seemed uncertain, both of his words and of his voice. The voice, made plaintive by distance and by the singer's hoarseness, faintly illuminated the cadence of the air with words expressing grief. Oh, the rain falls on my heavy locks, and the dew wets my skin. My babe lies cold within my arms, but none will let me in.
It's Bartel Darcy singing, and he wouldn't sing for us all the night. I'll get him to sing before he goes.
Oh, do, Mary Jane.
Mary Jane brushed past the others and ran to the staircase, but before she reached it, the singing stopped and the piano was closed abruptly. Mr. Darcy and Miss O'Callaghan came down the stairs.
What a pity. Oh, Mr. Darcy, it's downright mean of you to break off like that when we were all in raptures listening to you.
Oh, Mr. Darcy, you told us you'd a cold and wouldn't be able to sing. Now, wasn't that the great fib to tell?
But can't you see that I'm as hoarse as a crow?
He went into the pantry hastily and put on his overcoat. The others, taken aback by his rude speech, could find nothing to say. Aunt Kate wrinkled her brows and made signs to the others to drop the subject. Mr. Darcy stood swathing his neck carefully and frowning.
It's the weather.
Yes, everybody has colds.
They say it hasn't snowed like this in 30 years. I read in the newspapers this morning that the snow is general all over Ireland.
Oh, I love the look of snow.
Oh, I think Christmas is never really Christmas unless there's snow on the ground.
But poor Mr. Darcy doesn't like the snow.
When Mr. Darcy came from the pantry, he was fully swathed and buttoned. In a repentant tone, told them the history of his cold. Everyone gave him advice and said it was a great pity that he was ill and urged him to be very careful of his throat in the night air. Gabriel watched his wife, who did not join in the conversation. She was standing right under the dusty fanlight, and the flame of the gas lit up the rich bronze of her hair, which he had seen her drying at the fire a few days before. She was in the same attitude and seemed unaware of the talk about her. At last, she turned towards them, and Gabriel saw that there was colour on her cheeks and that her eyes were shining. A sudden tide of joy went leaping out of his heart.
Mr. Darcy, what is the name of that song that you were singing?
It's called The Lass of Aughrim, but I couldn't remember it properly. Why? Do you know it?
The Lass of Aughrim. Yes. I couldn't think of the name.
Come along, Greta. We must go. Well, good night, Aunt Kate, and thanks for the pleasant evening.
Good night, Gabriel. Good night, Greta.
Good night, Aunt Kate. Thanks ever so much. And good night, Aunt Julia.
Good night. Good
Good
night,
night,
Greta.
good night,
Safe home,
good night.
everybody. The morning was still dark. A dull yellow light brooded over the houses and the river, and the sky seemed to be descending. It was slushy underfoot. and only streaks and patches of snow lay on the roofs, the parapets of the quay, and on the area railings. The lamps were still burning redly in the murky air, and across the river, the palace of the four courts stood out menacingly against the heavy sky. Greta was walking on before Gabriel with Mr. Bartell Darcy, her shoes in a brown parcel tucked under one arm and her hands holding her skirt up from the slush. She no longer had any grace of attitude, but Gabriel's eyes were still bright with happiness. The blood went bounding along his veins and the thoughts went rioting through his brain, proud, joyful, tender, valorous. She was walking on before him, so lightly and so erect that he longed to run after her noiselessly, catch her by the shoulders and say something foolish and affectionate into her ear. She seemed to him so frail that he longed to defend her against something and then to be alone with her. Moments of their secret life together burst like stars upon his memory.
A heliotrope envelope was lying beside his breakfast cup, and he was caressing it with his hand. Birds were twittering in the ivy, and the sunny web of the curtain was shimmering along the floor. He could not eat for happiness. They were standing on the crowded platform, and he was placing a ticket inside the warm palm of her glove. He was standing with her in the cold, looking in through a grated window at a man making bottles in a roaring fire. It was very cold. Her face, fragrant in the cold air, was quite close to his. And suddenly he called out to the man at the furnace, "Is the fire hot, sir?" But the man could not hear with the noise of the furnace. It was just as well. He might have answered rudely. A wave of yet more tender joy escaped from his heart and went coursing in warm flood along his arteries. Like the tender fire of stars, moments of their life together that no one knew of or would ever know of broke upon and illumined his memory.
He longed to recall to her those moments, to make her forget the years of their dull existence together and remember only moments of ecstasy. For the years, he felt, had not quenched his soul or hers. Their children, his writing, her household cares, had not quenched all their soul's tender fire. In one letter that he had written to her, he said, "Why is it that words like these seem so dull and cold? Is it because there's no words tender enough to be your name?" Like distant music, these words that he had written years before were borne towards him from the past. He longed to be alone with her. When the others had gone away, when he and she were in the room together in their hotel, then they would be alone together. He would call her softly. Perhaps she would not hear it once. She would be undressing. Then something in his voice would strike her. She would turn and look at him.
At the corner of Wine Tavern Street, they met a cab. Gabriel was glad of its rattling noise as it saved him from conversation. She was looking out the window and seemed tired. The others spoke only a few words, pointing out some building or street. The horse galloped along wearily under the murky morning sky, dragging its old rattling box after his heels. And Gabriel was again in a cab with her, galloping to the boat, galloping to their honeymoon.
When the cab drew up before the hotel, Gabriel jumped out and, in spite of Mr. Bartell Darcy's protest, paid the driver. He gave the man a shilling over his fare. The man saluted and said, "A prosperous new year to you, sir." Greta leaned for a moment on Gabriel's arm, getting out of the cab, and again, when standing at the curbstone, bidding the others good night. She leaned lightly as lightly as when she had danced with him a few hours before. He had felt proud and happy then, happy that she was his, proud of her grace and wifely carriage. But now, after the kindling again of so many memories, the first touch of her body, musical and strange and perfumed, sent through him a keen pang of lust. Under cover of her silence, he pressed her arm closely to his side, and as they stood at the hotel door, he felt that they had escaped from their lives and duties, escaped from home and friends, and run away together with wild and radiant hearts to a new adventure.
An old man was dozing in a great hooded chair in the hall. He lit a candle in the office and went before them to the stairs. They followed him in silence, their feet falling in soft thuds on the thickly carpeted stairs. Greta mounted the stairs behind the porter, her head bowed in the ascent. Her frail shoulders curved as with a burden, her skirt girt tightly about her. He could have flung his arms about her hips and held her still, for his arms were trembling with desire to seize her, and only the stress of his nails against the palms of his hands held the wild impulse of his body in check. The porter halted on the stairs to settle his guttering candle. They halted too on the steps below him. In the silence, Gabriel could hear the falling of the molten wax into the tray and the thumping of his own heart against his ribs. The porter led them along a corridor and opened a door to their room. He pointed to the tap of the electric light and muttered an apology, but Gabriel cut him short, saying that they had light enough from the street. The porter, taking up his candle, mumbled good night and went out. Gabriel shut the lock to.
A ghostly light from the street lamp lay in a long shaft from one window to the door. Gabriel threw his overcoat and hat on the couch, and he crossed the room to the window. He looked down into the street in order that his emotions might calm a little. Then he turned and leaned against the chest of drawers with his back to the light. She had taken off her hat and cloak and was standing before a large swinging mirror, unhooking her waist. Gabriel paused for a few moments, watching her, and then said,
Greta,
She turned away from the mirror slowly and walked along the shaft of light towards him. Her face looked so serious and weary that the words would not pass Gabriel's lips. No, it was not the moment yet.
you look tired.
I am a little.
You don't feel ill or weak?
No. Tired, that's all.
She went to the window and stood there, looking out. Gabriel waited, and then, fearing that diffidence was about to conquer him, he said,
By the way, Greta,
What is it?
you know that poor fellow Malins?
Yeah, what about him?
Well, poor fellow, he's a decent sort of chap after all. He gave me back that sovereign I lent him, and I didn't expect it really. It's a pity he wouldn't keep away from that Brown, because he's not a bad fellow really.
He was trembling now with annoyance. Why did she seem so abstracted? He did not know how he could begin. Was she annoyed too about something? If she would only turn to him or come to him of her own accord. To take her as she was would be brutal. No, he must see some ardour in her eyes first. He longed to be master of her strange mood.
When did you lend him that £1?
Gabriel strove to restrain himself from breaking out into brutal language about the foolish Malins and his pound. He longed to cry to her from his soul, to crush her body against his, to overmaster her. But he said,
Oh, at Christmas, when he opened that little Christmas card shop in Henry Street.
he was in such a fever of rage and desire that he did not hear her come from the window. She stood before him for a moment, looking at him strangely. Then, suddenly raising herself on tiptoe and resting her hands lightly on his shoulders, she kissed him.
You're a very generous person, Gabriel.
Gabriel, trembling with delight at her sudden kiss and at the quaintness of her phrase, put his hands on her hair and began smoothing it back, scarcely touching it with his fingers. His heart was brimming over with happiness. Just when he was wishing for it, she had come to him of her own accord. Perhaps her thoughts had been running with his. Perhaps she had felt the impetuous desire that was in him. And then the yielding mood had come upon her. Now that she had fallen to him so easily, he wondered why he had been so diffident. He said softly,
Greta, dear, what are you thinking about? Tell me what it is, Greta. I think I know what is the matter. Do I know?
I'm thinking about that song, The Lass of Aughrim.
What about that song? Why does that make you cry? Greta.
Just a person that I used to know long ago used to sing that song.
And who was this person long ago?
It's a person I used to know in Galway when I was living with my grandmother.
Someone you were in love with?
It was a young boy I used to know called Michael Fury. He used to sing that song, The Lass of Aughrim. He was very delicate. I can see him so plainly. Such eyes as he had, big, dark eyes, and such an expression in them. An expression.
Oh, then you are in love with him.
I used to go out walking with him when I was in Galway.
I see. Perhaps that's why you wanted to go to Galway with that Ivers girl.
What for?
How do I know? To see him, perhaps.
He is dead. He died when he was only 17. Oh, isn't it a terrible thing to die so young as that?
And what was he?
He was in the gasworks.
What did he die of so young, Greta? Consumption, was it?
I think he died for me.
A vague terror seized Gabriel at this answer, as if, in the hour he had hoped to triumph, some impalpable and vindictive being was coming against him, gathering force against him in his vague world. But he shook himself free of it with an effort of reason and continued to caress her hand. He did not question her again, for he felt that she would tell him of herself. Her hand was warm and moist. It did not respond to his touch. But he continued to caress it, just as he had caressed her first letter to him on that spring morning.
It was in the winter, about the beginning of the winter. I was going to leave my grandmother's and come up here to the convent. And he was ill at that time at his lodgings in Galway, and he wouldn't be let out. And his people in Uachtarard were written to. He was in decline, they said, or something like that. I never knew rightly. The poor fella. He was very fond of me, and he was such a gentle boy. We used to go out together walking, you know, Gabriel, the way they do in the country. And he was going to study singing, only for his health. He had a very good voice. Poor Michael Fury.
Well, and then?
Well, and then it came for the time for me to leave to Galway and come up to the convent, and, well, he was much worse, and I wouldn't be let see him. So I wrote him a letter and I said that I was going to Dublin and that I'd be back in the summer and would be hoping that he'd be better by then. And then the night before I left, I was in my grandmother's house in Nuns Island. I was packing up and I heard gravel being thrown up against the window, but the window was so wet I couldn't see, so I ran downstairs just as I was and I slipped out into the back garden, and there was the poor fella at the end of the garden, shivering.
Did you not tell him to go back?
I implored of him to go home at once. I told him he would get his death in the rain. But he said he did not want to live. I can see his eyes as well. Oh, he was standing at the end of the wall where there was a tree.
And did he go home?
Yes, he did. He went home, and when I was only a week in the convent, he died. And he was buried in Uachtararden. Oh, God. Oh, the day I heard that he was dead.
Greta stopped. Choking with sobs and overcome by emotion, she flung herself face downwards on the bed, sobbing in the quilt. Gabriel held her hand for a moment longer, and then, shy of intruding on her grief, let it fall gently and quietly walked to the window. She was fast asleep. Gabriel looked for a few moments unresentfully on her tangled hair and half-opened mouth, and listened to her deep, drawn breath. So, she had had that romance in her life. A man had died for her sake. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part he, her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept, as though he and she had never lived together as man and wife. His curious eyes rested long upon her face and on her hair, and he thought of what she must have been like then, in that time of her first girlish beauty. A strange, friendly pity for her entered his soul. He did not like to say, even to himself, that her face was no longer beautiful, but he knew it was no longer the face for which Michael Fury had braved death. Perhaps she had not told him all the story.
His eyes moved to the chair, over which she had thrown some of her clothes. A petticoat string dangled to the floor. One boot stood upright, its limp upper fallen down. The fellow of it lay on its side. He wondered at the riot of his emotions from the hour before. From what had it proceeded? From his aunt's supper? From his own foolish speech? Perhaps the wine and dancing, or the merrymaking in the hall when saying good night, or even the pleasure of the walk home in the snow. He did not know the answer.
The air of the room chilled his shoulders. He thought of poor Aunt Julia. She too would soon be a shade, with the shade of Patrick Morkan and his horse. He had caught that haggard look upon her face for a moment when she was singing Arrayed for the Bridal. Soon, perhaps, he would be sitting in that same drawing room, dressed in black, his silk hat on his knees. The blinds would be drawn down, and Aunt Kate would be sitting beside him, crying and blowing her nose and telling him how Aunt Julia had died. He would cast about in his mind for some words that might console her, and would find only lame and useless ones. Yes, that would happen very soon.
One by one, they were all becoming shades. Better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how Greta had locked in her heart for so many years that image of her lover's eyes when he had told her that he did not wish to live.
Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness he imagined he saw the form of the young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near also.
His soul had approached that region where dwell the vast hosts of the dead. He was conscious of, but could not apprehend, their wayward and flickering existence. His own identity was fading out into a grey, impalpable world, the solid world itself, which these dead had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling.
A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling too upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill, where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe, and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead.
If you'll be the last.
Yeah, we need to take some pictures from our previous.
I know.
Maybe had to leave to go around the back. Clear the mind.
Very good. Shane, well done. You have to be pleased. You've got an awful lot of work to do to that. Excellent. Well done.